My spoiled sister refuses to work, and my dad's endless indulgence is tearing our family apart. She's trapped in a world of comfort, dodging even the smallest duties. Meanwhile, my father's constant leniency is driving a wedge deep within our family. I never imagined that at 26 I'd be staring down the barrel of losing everything I thought was stable. My job, my future, and my family. Losing my job was hard, but that was only the surface. The real pain was knowing my family was slowly falling apart, and I was caught in the middle, powerless to stop it. Dad is 64 now. He used to be the rock of our family, working every odd job he could find, doing whatever it took to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. But those days feel like a lifetime ago. His health has deteriorated. Arthritis and fatigue have stolen his strength, making the work he once did impossible. It's heartbreaking to see a man who once carried us all now struggling to carry himself. The doctors say he might only have a few years left where he can even work at all. Gina, my older sister, is 31. She's the closest to being independent in this mess, but her job barely pays $50,000 a year, not enough to cover the bills or help much. She works long hours, exhausted but determined. I admire her for that. But sometimes I see the strain in her eyes. It's the strain of someone trying to hold a crumbling house together with their bare hands. And then there's Georgia, my younger sister, 24. She's the wild card, the shadow hanging over our family's fragile balance. She was born delayed, which meant she learned things slower than most kids her age. But she's not dumb. In fact, she's smarter than most people I know, just trapped behind her social awkwardness and emotional immaturity. Growing up, Dad treated Georgia differently. Maybe it was pity. Maybe it was fear of pushing her too hard, but whatever the reason, he coddled her like she was made of glass. He never held her accountable. He never corrected her bad habits or bad manners. Instead, he showered her with gifts and excuses, always saying, she'll learn this stuff at school. But school wasn't kind to Georgia. Bullied, isolated, she dropped out, and after that, everything stopped. For 9 years, she's lived at home doing nothing but staring at her iPad, avoiding the world. No ambition, no friends, no job. Just endless scrolling through a screen that seems to numb her pain. I've tried to understand. I've tried to be patient. But the truth is, it's exhausting. When Dad gave up on pushing her, he set her on a path that's hurting all of us. I watch him shrink in health and spirit while she floats through life like a ghost, untouched by the struggles that are tearing us apart. Mom passed away a few years ago, and that loss shattered us. She was the glue, the only person who kept us connected, who pushed Georgia to do better, who believed in all of us. Without Mom, the house feels hollow. I feel like I'm holding up a collapsing wall with my bare hands, and every day the cracks grow wider. Losing my job hit me like a tidal wave. I was trying to build a career to make something of myself, but suddenly the ground beneath me vanished. I was forced to come home to face this family in crisis. I felt anger, frustration, sadness, and helplessness all at once. I needed stability, but here all I found was chaos. One night I sat down with Georgia. I wanted to reach her, to make her see what was happening around her. She was curled up on the couch, eyes glued to her iPad as usual, the glow of the screen the only light in the room. "I can't do this alone," I said, voice trembling. "Dad can't work anymore. Gina's barely scraping by. We need you to help. You need to get a job, start contributing." She looked up at me, eyes tired but defiant. "I don't want responsibilities," she said softly. "I just want to be young and free." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Young and free. What world was she living in? Because this one, our world, was filled with bills, doctor's appointments, endless sacrifices, and crushing disappointment. There was no freedom in watching the people you love fall apart. That night I lay awake thinking about how we got here. How Dad's kindness and fear of pushing her had turned into years of enabling a life of stagnation. How Gina and I were left carrying the weight of a family unraveling at the seams. How I was losing faith in my family and myself. But despite it all, a part of me still hoped. Maybe, just maybe, Georgia could find a way out of this darkness. Maybe we could all. Because if we don't, if she stays like this, it's not just her life she's wasting, it's all of ours. The days after that conversation with Georgia were some of the hardest I've ever faced. The house felt heavier, the silence louder. I wanted to believe she would come around, that she'd feel the weight of what she was leaving behind and take a step forward. But every morning she remained the same disconnected, distant, trapped in her own world. Gina and I tried everything we could think of. We talked, we begged, we offered help. I even suggested counseling, hoping that maybe a professional could reach her, where we failed. But Georgia always refused. "I'm fine," she'd say, eyes darting away, voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't just frustration anymore. It was desperation. Watching her spiral into isolation felt like watching someone drown while you're standing on the shore helpless. The bills piled up. Dad's health worsened. Gina and I were stretched thin, emotionally, financially, mentally. One evening after Gina got home from a grueling double shift, we sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by unopened bills. Dad was asleep in his chair, exhausted from a rare day of physical therapy. Georgia was nowhere to be seen. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up," Gina said, rubbing her temples. "We're barely holding on." I nodded, trying to swallow the lump forming in my throat. "I know, but we have to keep trying." The truth was, I felt torn apart inside. Part of me wanted to scream at Georgia, to shake her until she understood what she was doing to us all. But the other part knew that anger wouldn't fix anything, that her anxiety and fear were chains I couldn't break. Growing up, I never realized how much Dad's decision to shield Georgia from failure had shaped her future, or lack of one. What seemed like love was in the end the cruelest kind of imprisonment. It robbed her of resilience, of independence, of the chance to learn from mistakes. I thought about how much I wanted to protect her too, but realized that sometimes protection means pushing people to stand on their own. And she wasn't standing, she was sinking. One morning I found her in the living room, curled up on the floor, tears silently streaming down her face. For the first time in years, she looked vulnerable, real. "What's wrong?" I asked gently, kneeling beside her. She shook her head, unable to speak at first. Then finally, the dam broke. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I don't know how to do anything. I'm scared I'll fail." In that moment, everything made sense. The anxiety, the avoidance, the refusal to grow up. It was all fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of rejection, fear of being left behind. I hugged her tightly, feeling the fragility beneath her tough exterior. "You're not alone," I told her. "We'll figure this out together." But as I looked at her trembling form, I knew that love alone wouldn't be enough. This was bigger than us. It was a battle between hope and despair, between the past that held her captive and a future she couldn't yet see. That day, I made a silent promise I would do whatever it took to help Georgia find her way, even if it meant breaking my own heart. The fragile hope I had felt with Georgia's moment of vulnerability was quickly tested. The days that followed brought no easy breakthroughs, only more tension, more silence filled with unspoken anger and disappointment. The house that once held our childhood memories now felt like a battleground, each room echoing with the weight of what we'd lost and what we still desperately needed to find. Gina and I tried to divide the tasks as best we could. She handled the bills and groceries while I focused on keeping Dad's medical appointments in order. But between the stress and exhaustion, the cracks in our relationship began to show. Small arguments sparked over the smallest things. A forgotten text, a misplaced dish, a careless word. But beneath them lay something deeper: frustration that none of us knew how to fix the damage. Georgia retreated further. The more pressure we put on her, the more she shut down. One evening after I asked her again to clean up the kitchen, she snapped. "I'm not your employee," she yelled, voice cracking. "Why do you care so much? I don't want to be here anymore." I stood frozen, stunned by the sudden burst of anger. It wasn't like her to lash out, but I could see the pain behind it, a desperate cry from someone trapped in a world she didn't understand how to navigate. "We care because you're family," I said quietly. "We're trying to help." But she shook her head and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. That night, I lay awake, wondering how we'd gotten here. How had a family that once felt so close become a place where we barely recognized each other? I thought of Dad, how his illness and past choices had rippled through our lives like an invisible storm. When he was healthy, Dad was a steady force, flawed but loving in his own way. Now the man who once worked odd jobs to keep us afloat was confined to a chair, his strength fading like the last light of a dying ember. The weight of responsibility had fallen almost entirely on Gina and me. One afternoon, I caught Dad staring blankly out the window, lost in thought. I sat beside him, hesitant to break the silence. "You're tired," I said gently. He nodded. "I am. I know things are hard. We all feel it." He looked at me, eyes clouded with something I couldn't quite name. Regret, sadness, resignation. "I never wanted this," he said. "I wanted to protect Georgia. Protect all of you. But maybe I did the wrong thing." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. For years, I'd blamed him for spoiling Georgia, for letting her drift without consequences. But hearing him admit his mistakes softened the edges of my anger. "It's not too late," I said. "We can still fix this together." But even as I spoke, I felt the fragility of those words. Family wasn't something you could simply repair with apologies or good intentions. It was messy, complicated, full of scars that refused to fade. That night, I found Georgia sitting alone in her room, staring at her phone. I sat beside her, careful not to startle. "Can we talk?" I asked softly. She hesitated, then nodded. "I know you're scared," I said, "but we're here. You don't have to do this alone." She looked at me, eyes wet but fierce. "I don't want to fail again." "You won't," I promised. "Step by step, we'll figure it out." She gave a small, shaky smile, a flicker of hope in the darkness. But as I left her room, I knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead was long and uncertain, filled with hard choices and painful truths. Family was breaking apart, and whether we could hold the pieces together was still unknown. The days that followed felt like walking on a tightrope stretched thin over an endless abyss. Every small misstep threatened to send us tumbling into chaos. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as if the walls of the house were closing in on us, trapping us in this cycle of frustration and helplessness. Georgia made a small effort. She agreed to attend a counseling session with a therapist specialized in emotional and social challenges. For a moment, it felt like a breakthrough, a sliver of light in the darkness. But the progress was fragile, like a spider's web trembling in the wind. Her anxiety, though, was relentless. Even simple tasks like answering a phone call or stepping outside the house became monumental challenges. She was fighting a war no one else could see, and every attempt to help seemed to push her further into isolation. Meanwhile, Gina and I tried to hold everything together, but the pressure was breaking us too. Gina's job was barely enough to cover the bills, and Dad's health was declining faster than we'd anticipated. Nights were spent in exhaustion, arguing about how to manage money, how to care for Dad, how to support Georgia, all of us carrying invisible burdens that weighed down our spirits. One night, after a long day, filled with failed attempts to get Georgia to participate in family activities, I found myself alone in the living room. The silence was deafening. My phone buzzed a message from Gina. "I can't do this anymore." Those words hit me harder than anything else. We were supposed to be in this together, but the cracks were deepening. I called her immediately. Her voice was shaky, tired. "I feel like I'm drowning," she confessed. "I'm trying so hard, but it's like none of it matters." I didn't have an answer. I only knew I felt the same. That same week, Dad had a medical scare. His breathing became labored, and an emergency hospital visit followed. Seeing him hooked to machines, frail and pale, made the reality impossible to ignore. We were losing him. The hospital room was cold sterile, a stark contrast to the warmth and chaos of our home. As I sat by Dad's bedside holding his hand, I felt the weight of every choice, every regret. He squeezed my hand weakly. "Take care of them," he whispered. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. When Dad returned home, the family dynamic shifted again. Gina and I became caregivers, juggling medications, appointments, and home care. Georgia, meanwhile, withdrew further, retreating into her room and her devices. Her world was shrinking while ours expanded with responsibilities. One evening, I confronted her. "You're hurting too," I said. "We're all struggling, but we need you with us." She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how," she whispered. "I'm scared I'll just mess everything up." That honesty cracked something open. It wasn't just about responsibility. It was about fear, about feeling lost and abandoned in a family fractured by illness and hardship. I pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. "We'll figure it out. Together." But deep down, I wondered if that was enough. Because sometimes love isn't enough to fix what's broken. The final months were a blur of exhaustion, heartbreak, and small moments of unexpected grace. Dad's condition worsened steadily, and the house, once a place of laughter and hope, now felt heavy with the weight of impending loss. Through it all, Gina and I continued to shoulder most of the responsibilities. The endless cycle of doctor visits, medication schedules, and sleepless nights tested every ounce of our strength. Yet in those difficult moments, we found fleeting glimpses of resilience we didn't know we had. Georgia too began to change. Not overnight and not perfectly, but there was a subtle shift. After that tearful conversation, she started attending her therapy sessions more regularly. The anxiety didn't vanish, but she started talking about small goals, learning to cook, stepping outside, more even applying for part-time work. It was slow and painful progress, but it was progress nonetheless. The day Dad passed was a gray, cold morning. I was there holding his hand, surrounded by family. The grief was overwhelming, a tidal wave crashing over us all, leaving raw wounds and aching silence in its wake. In the weeks that followed, the house was quieter, emptier, but somehow lighter. The burden of caregiving lifted, replaced by the heavy responsibility of moving forward without him. Gina and I had many long talks about what came next, about how we needed to support Georgia to help her find her own path, about how we would rebuild not just the family's finances, but the family itself, fragile, scarred, but still standing. I realized something important. Love doesn't always mean having the perfect family or a perfect life. Sometimes it means accepting the broken pieces and finding a way to hold them together anyway. We started making plans, small steps to create stability. Gina took on extra shifts and I began searching for jobs closer to home so I could be there for Georgia. We set up meetings with counselors, financial advisors, and social workers. It wasn't easy and there were setbacks, but we were no longer alone. And Georgia, she surprised us. The girl who once refused to take responsibility slowly began showing signs of strength. She applied for a part-time job at a local bookstore. She started joining family dinners again, laughing shyly at jokes, trying to find her place. Watching her grow reminded me that healing takes time, that sometimes the hardest battles are fought quietly inside. This story isn't about perfect endings. It's about survival, about fighting through pain, about the messy, complicated love that binds a family together, even when everything seems to fall apart. We are still broken in many ways, but we are moving forward, together, and maybe that's enough. And maybe, if you found this story powerful, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life dramas. Your support means a lot and helps us share more stories like this.